get off the stage line to the follow-on speaker, who will be talking about the possibility of small reactors, which I think is a very good idea, that can be proliferated and associated with small portions of the grid to assure that they continue operations. And Bob Frank, former colonel in the Air Force, who's been associated with Lawrence Livermore and this project for a number of years, is going to talk with you about those effects, those systems.
Hank, thank you very much. Well, as advertised, well done, sir. Thank you very much. Colonel Bob Frank, part of the Nevada team, we're very pleased to say is not only going to be helping us put you all in this room and hopefully engage you in the work that we're about, but also talk to you a little bit about some of the practical near-term steps that can be taken to do something about the vulnerabilities that you've just been exposed to. Colonel, welcome. Thank you very much for your service to our country and for being here as well.
Thank you.
Good to have you. Take one of these.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Frank, and I really appreciate Ambassador Cooper's transition there into my speech, my presentation. I would like to, hold on just a second. What did I do with my presentation? Did I leave it on the table, Kay? Yeah, great. I'm not rattled or anything. I just walked off without my speech. Anyway, normally I like to speak like most of your other presentations, but today, because of the time constraints and what I wanted to try to communicate with all of you is a lot of detail, and you will know that my slides will be available to you over the internet also in the future so that you can refer to them. But I'm going to go real fast. I'm going to read most of what I have here for your convenience so I can cover it in the time frame and quite frankly, see where we can go. Now, first of all, as an introduction, I'm going to say that this is the first time this presentation has been given, and I'm doing it specifically because of Frank Gaffney and the CSP organization that says, look, we really need people at the grassroots state level who will do more in the actual practical hands-on type application. I don't claim to be an expert in this area. My career in logistics and in computers prepares me to work on very detailed solutions from a tangible point of view. But quite frankly, I'm looking at a lot of people's faces out here this afternoon, and many of you have more talents than I have in terms of resolving some of these issues. And as I go through these slides, you'll understand why I say that. So I'm going to start off real quickly with the first slide. And the question is, what can you do to help secure the grid? First of all, as mentioned, I'm retired Air Force, living in Henderson. My background is in business experience and in computers and logistics. I'm serving as your volunteer leader for the National Secure the Grid Coalition. The intent here is to try to use me as a resource to help you, help us map this out and deal with the power companies, deal with the Public Utility Commission, deal with the members of the legislature, and so forth and so on, all the people that have something to say or do concerning solving this big problem. And so I'm going to be asking at the end of this for you to help me sign up to figure out how to actually work this. My partner in this group is from Reno, Nevada, Dr. Craig Smith. He has a PhD in nuclear science and engineering from UCLA, and he's one of the national experts on this small modular nuclear power system that Ambassador Cooper mentioned. He's not with us today because he had a previous bucket list item, as he called it, to take his wife on a tour of the Antarctic. Not my idea of a great vacation, but he was really excited about going there for the first time in his life. So he's down there completely out of touch, but he's going to be with us as part of the team, and I look forward to introducing him to you when we have a chance in the future. This Action Summit section has reminded us that electricity is the lifeblood of our civilization. No exaggeration. It's just as important to our life as our blood is to our body. And we need to recognize that. And can you imagine anybody who believes that, who understands that, who accepts that, and doesn't do what they have to do or can do to help solve the problem? It's a mystery, and we're going to try to solve that. Obviously, without electricity, hundreds of millions will die in less than a year. And our state and national defenses against known types of modern grid attacks are seen as shamefully inadequate. For us to survive, we're going to have to do something, and we're going to have to do it now. We don't have 20 or 30 years to solve it. We might not even have 10 years. And as Dr. Price said, it might happen tomorrow because they're already prepared to come after us. And we've waited and dug the hole so deep. So, again, as a transition to the next slide, what can you do? And as Dr. Pry has said, if we as citizens are not willing to carry the burden of making sure our government and our first responders and our companies that provide services, if we're not willing to do what only we can do to motivate them and energize them, then we fail, because they don't seem to want to do it without being pushed. First, we must work rapidly to help identify and eliminate grid vulnerabilities and seriously prepare for terrorist war acts in our communities. We're at domestic war's threshold, are we not? Is this not domestic war? It's a very serious situation. We must learn the facts at both the local and national levels. The fact that you're here means you already know something, but I can assure you that after 6 months worth of research on my own, we're just beginning to understand, first of all, what is the issues, who is responsible for what, and how should the responsibilities be changed so that, in fact, what we get is what we need. It's not a simple issue. It's one thing to talk about the threat, but trying to figure out what to do about it is really complicated, and it really requires a lot of different kinds of brain power. Okay, so by the way, this entire presentation is made with the idea of a straw man output saying, okay, what could we do, and get the conversation started, because once we form our group and those of you that are willing to volunteer will start giving us feedback, I'm sure we're going to refine this approach a great deal as we go through time, but you got to start somewhere, and that's what we're doing this afternoon. So the first step is to form action groups, not study groups, action groups, to advocate realistic defense in depth capabilities. Defense in depth. That means not just the federal, but also the state, the cities, the counties, everyone who has resources that play in the end-to-end results of electric power. These action groups must promote state-level restoration. Now, one of the things I can tell you as a senior military retired officer is I don't care how good your defense system is, it can be defeated by someone. Sooner or later, no matter what kind of defense system we come up with, it could be defeated. So we have to, at the same time, we're trying to maximize our defense in depth. We also have to maximize what our restoration plans are. And quite frankly, there are going to be a lot of people who resist, not just the power companies, but a lot of other people, because money will be involved, time and effort will be involved. But guess what? Every one of the people that are supposed to be doing what they should be doing have the same probability that we have. They're just as dead as we are if they don't do their job, and we need to communicate that. Okay, next slide, state and regional defense actions. Action groups need to focus on state and local defense actions to secure the group. State and local defense actions. My entire philosophy and focus here, based upon Frank Gaffney's encouragement, is to focus the fact that this cannot be just dumped on Washington and say, hey, I'm mad at Washington and I want you to do your job. No, we need to be upset with every level of our government system, including our Guard and our Reserve, and even our active duty military, because as an active duty military logistician, I can tell you I can't remember in my career anybody ever saying we had any responsibility for anything in the continental U.S. We're there to fight offensive wars overseas, and the Guard and Reserve and the law enforcement people are supposed to handle the stuff in the States. We have a new situation here with this grid that says, hey, we've got internal domestic warfare, and some new definitions are going to have to be done, in my opinion. Action groups need to focus on state and local defense actions. Comprehensive studies and reports must be written and published on how states, counties, and cities prepare to protect our vital electric power resources. Why? Well, because so many people don't know what the heck is going on. So we're going to have to communicate. But we can't just wait for 2 or 3 years while we study it. We're going to have to start working on solutions while we're communicating. And again, as Dr. Price suggested, it's going to take a lot of us citizens. I don't know whether it's going to be 1%, 10%, 20%. We're going to have to wake up a lot of people and say, okay, we're just not, what's the old movie thing? I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Well, if you do keep on taking it, and if the assessments are correct, they won't matter because we're all going to be dead. Not a very good prospect. We have to do something. Okay, it's going to be hard to find ways to motivate some state and local executive branch agencies, including law enforcement, to act as they should without them claiming to have, and are you ready for this? They must have more funds, more staff, and years of time before they can respond. Typical government response. We can expect that. So our challenge is going to be, in terms of working the restoration solutions, is to say, you can't wait for more money, and you can't wait for more staff. You're going to have to do it now because we're all going to be gone. There is no time to play the game. That's going to be an interesting conversation. Those of you who have done this before at some of the legislative sessions like I have know that's not easy. Okay, next slide. State and regional restoration actions. Studying and proposing restoration actions should consider the types of power production and distribution lines considered as assured power and uninterruptible power. Now, these are new terms that I take the blame for throwing out there because I like the word assured power because that would include EMP protection, that would include certain types of local defense against terrorism. That would simply say, look, we really need, as citizens, as the taxpayers of this country, we really need to have some assurance that the lifeblood of our civilization is in fact going to be there regardless of the threats. I can't tell you today exactly how we can do that, but I do know from my military planning experience that if you don't set a goal that you need to meet, you can't reach it. So you got to start with saying, I want assured power as a citizen, all right? And I want uninterruptible power from a sustainability point of view as a matter of service, and that's what I'm willing to pay for. So I'm going to try that and see how far we can go with it, and I'm going to ask some of you to help me figure out exactly how that could be done, because I'm sure the power company is going to say, well, we can't do either one. Western states like Nevada often have no nuclear power plants, and you saw on Ambassador Cooper's chart, there's nothing in Nevada, there's nothing in Colorado, there's nothing in Montana. So what is our baseline? What do we fall back on in terms of if something starts failing, assuming that we're not hit by the solar flare that was talked about? It's my opinion that we ought to be talking about looking for plants that can be vital for providing another word I'd like to talk about is minimum essential power production in the event of domestic warfare. Minimum essential power production. We don't have to have all the power all the time, but we got to have some of the power all the time. And the question is, how do we get there from here? And when we end up here, we'll talk about some possibilities, and we're looking for others. So large and small power generators, I'd like to remind you, you probably thought of this already, depending on fossil fuel resupply lines, are vulnerable to shutdowns due to pipeline and transportation attacks in other areas. Assuming we don't have an EMP attack and all we got is just terrorism or sapper attacks, but the problem is even if your natural gas power plant is running just fine, its resupply on its fuel may not be running just fine, so it's kind of academic. All these have to be considered. And by the way, before I get too far into this thing, I'm going to tell you all, having served more than 20 years in the Air Force, ending up in the Pentagon, I'll have to tell you that having been exposed to lots of war plans, I can assure you that a lot of the answers to some of the questions we have are classified. Some will be classified for good reason, and others will be classified because the results are embarrassing to certain bureaucrats, and they don't want you to know that they have failed their job. And so we're going to have to deal with both kinds of situations. And in some cases, some of our working group is going to have probably a clearance, because in order for us to do our job, we might have to be included as an advisor or as an augmentee to some things like the Homeland Defense Group Commission or whatever. Our team is going to be proposing considerations of safe, EMP-protected, low-cost, no water cooling required, small modular reactor power plants as practical ways to provide future assured power services to regions not having such sustained positions. Now, I just described to you something that is feasible today. It's been feasible for decades. As a matter of fact, when you look at the power plants that run the subs and the aircraft carriers, you know that certain types of small modular nuclear reactors have been perfectly safe for decades, and they've got 4 generations of reactors since that time. You would be absolutely amazed at how much money your government has spent inventing new technologies in the national labs that could be built within a reasonable period of time, but because of the politics and because of the energy companies, both fossil fuel companies as well as green energy companies as well as others, hydroelectric, there's all kinds of people working in the market for energy, but none of them have the kind of assured capability that these small modular reactors have, and so there's sort of like a paradigm shift that they start using them. So one of the things you'll find, when I worked at Livermore Lab, I got my nose rubbed into the technology there, and I've been very excited about it for 20 years since that time. But the trouble is it takes citizens to drive this kind of a change in paradigm, because right now the energy lobbies are holding back these possibilities. Okay, I'm going to head up because I'm running over time. This next chart, top 10 defense restoration actions. I'm not going to talk to that chart. Please take that with you. Read it, study it, and think about it, because every single one of those 10 items could be a seminar all by themselves. But I put this up here just to get your mind thinking about it's more than just small modular reactors. There's all kinds of, you see the first 5 we're talking about how do you deal with the bureaucrats, with the managers, and the system that is controlling the power production today. That's the first 5. The second 5 are about technical issues in terms of, well, gee, do we have spare parts to back up the transformers? Do we have spare parts to back up damaged power lines? The answer usually is no. And if you did, they're probably not in secure storage. And in speaking as a military person, there's no point in spending millions of dollars for backup spares in case if you have a war requirement if you don't protect the storage point also. So there's a lot of thinking going on in this area. So please read through that, and those of you interested, get into them. Next chart. I'm going to finish up real quick now. There's a picture there, and I want you to think about for a second. It looks like a giant pill. You see the little man down there by the bottom of that vertical pill? That's one of these small modular nuclear reactors that could handle a city about the size of Henderson completely by itself. It could handle all of the, it's estimated to handle something like the Las Vegas Strip. But these kinds of small reactors, it can be buried underground, it can be completely safe, and it has no pollution, no air pollution, and it will run for 30 years on waste nuclear materials. Think about that for a second. You don't have to store the waste forever. You can just use it and burn it up. This has all been proven. This is not pie in the sky stuff. So there's another chart right behind this, and you can read that for yourself. Next chart, please. And I got one after that. This is for you techies in the audience. Most of the people won't appreciate. Whoop, you went too far. Most of you won't appreciate what that's saying on that chart. But for the techies, I want you to know this is not smoke and mirrors. This is a design that was actually developed by Dr. Craig Smith, part of our team, while he was at Livermore Lab. It was paid for by your taxpayer expense to design it, but it was never built because there was no customer. There was no customer, so there's no point in building it. You need a customer. There are probably a dozen companies in the U.S., much less around the world, that would love to have a customer to build something like that. If not exactly that same design, there are probably a dozen other designs that could be built. But the point is that the technology is understood, the concepts are understood, it's safe, It's reliable, it's cheaper power, and the only thing that's holding it up is the process of our system of the lobbyists that says, no, you can't have it. We want you to keep doing what you got. Meanwhile, and the reason why I'm pleased to be able to join Frank's group is to be able to at least educate you that this is possible, but not just because of a technology. How else, and I'm looking for this, how else can we get assured power, uninterruptible power, that does not require resupply of fuel? Think about it for a second. If you've got a coal plant, you're going to have to keep that train with those coal cars filled up every day over the railroads, and if you survive an EMP attack. So you've got more problems than just protecting the EMP. You've got other kinds of terrorism attacks, and the point is how do we get the kind of assured power that we need, that we have to have, not only today, but for the next 20 or 30 years. So my final chart is, if you'll go to that final chart. Gosh, I wish I had more time. From a summary point of view, it simply said, we need your help. I volunteered to help because I really care passionately about this issue. I've been worried about this issue for almost 20 years now, and frustrated like Dr. Pry and others, saying, why don't people care about this? I mean, we're talking about life and death matter here. Why don't people care about this? So what I'm asking you to do is, even if you think you're not technically qualified, even if you think you're not politically connected, even if you think that you don't have a lot of time, we are going to have to get a lot of citizens caring about their lives, their families, and putting enough pressure on our system so they can't say no. They just can't say no. Thank you, Frank.
Amen. Thank you very much, Colonel. I reckon some of you have questions about all this, and I'm going to hope that our three distinguished panelists, I don't know if we've got Hank somewhere out there in the ether or not, but probably it'll simplify things if we don't. But let me just invite your responses to this very sobering analysis of a problem. And by the way, if you're concerned that somehow we're telling the enemy things that would make us more vulnerable, what Peter Pry and I think several of our speakers have already pointed out is the enemy knows about all this. Our government knows all about this. The only people who are being kept in the dark are the American people, and the question is, will they be kept there permanently by inaction on our part? So I want to particularly thank those of you who've been talking about what we can do about this, and I'll pass a microphone around to you all to take questions. Any questions? Yes, sir, right here.
The only item that I've noticed is that most of what we've
George,
had here...
Say your name.
Yeah, just identify yourself again, sir, if you would. Yes, sir, I think it is.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. My name is George Ingram, ADAD Corps. I've been working on a lot of these problems for the last 20 years of retirement. And Bob Frank, I know personally. He and I talked many years ago about how I started, and that was medical records. But suddenly I came to the conclusion if I send the wrong medical record to somebody, because I can't identify who they really are, I might kill them. So identity became the most important thing in everything that I could think of. The one thing that I can put a point that I can definitely stop is number 7 on your last indicator, and that is how to stop access by internet into the SCADA units. That I know how to do.
That would be very useful, I think.
But unfortunately,
question?
I'm not well known. I don't have any titles. I'm not an ambassador or anything else. I'm an ordinary citizen. Businesses have to take a point in this also. I've heard all about state, federal, municipal, etc., government, and etc., but we didn't talk much about the companies that are involved and their desire not to even talk to me about this problem of the power grid.
Let's address that.
Okay, right there is a problem. I'm a non-entity to them.
Would any of you like to provide counsel on why he's having that problem and what we might do to help by bringing him into this Secure the Grid coalition? Peter?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, we haven't been able to talk about everything we wanted to here today because of limits on time. But one reason you've probably been encountering roadblocks is from local businesses is they probably haven't heard about this threat either and don't understand about it. It hasn't been on the radar screen of the federal government, and the state government and local emergency planners and responders look to the federal level. There are something like 15 canonical national planning scenarios, and EMP isn't among them. Although when the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act passes, which I expect it to do next year, it will. I think Senator Hall might have some interesting comments on this, because I do think you're right about going to businesses and industries that depend upon electricity, the consumers of electricity in the business area, to get them on our side to become a powerful force to help us pressure the electric power industry to do the right thing.
Thank you, Peter. Absolutely. One of the biggest problems we have is ignorance. This issue is not well known outside the people who really are pretty closely in line with the Tea Party groups or happen to pay a little bit of attention to what's going on. Talk to the average person, they have no clue what we're talking about. And what I discovered as I was trying to find out what people really knew, it was pointed out to me that several years ago, Texas had a really poor electrical power system. Had a lot of brownouts, a lot of blackouts, and there were businesses that said they were fed up. Either Texas was going to get its electrical power system where it was reliable, or they were going to go somewhere else. And so it finally got the power companies' attention, because we were going to lose a lot of the economy with companies either not expanding or moving away, because businesses depend on power, and a power interruption to some businesses for 2 weeks would put them out completely. I know in talking to a little company called Texas Instruments, their number was 1 second of power interruption cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so they wanted a reliable system. And so my approach now is I'm going to the business community, the Texas Business Association, the Manufacturers Association, the Chemical Association, the Texoga, the oil and gas, the consumers, the users of it, and talk to them about the economic side of this, in that it's like an insurance policy. It's like having the fire extinguishers in your house or business, so that if something were to happen, we would be able to do something about it. If we can't get to the point where the lights don't blink, we need to be to the point where we can turn them back on in a reasonable amount of time, and business is going to lose a lot of money if they don't. So I'm approaching it with that community from this is an economic benefit to you. For the other folks in the government side who keep trying to want to use our taxpayer dollars to bribe companies to move to Texas with our enterprise fund and tax abatements, I said, instead of wasting that money there, why don't we just make the electrical grid not only reliable in a benign environment, well, let's have an electrical grid that is reliable in a hostile environment. I said, you won't be able to keep the businesses from moving into the state if that were to happen. So it's an education process of getting people to understand and get the message out. That's why I've jumped at every chance I can to talk on radio or get on a TV program or come here, talk to anybody about it, because that's the only way we're going to find out about it. And somebody made eye contact with me in the airport the other day, and I said, have you heard about the EMP threat? So I remember my wife doing it in the checkout line at Walmart.
There's one thing I'd like to mention here. Money isn't the only thing. Our national security is, with the power grid is knocked out, how do we manufacture guns, tanks, any kind of military equipment whatsoever? And while we're trying to get the electrical grid back up, the enemy is marching in and wiping us out.
George, if you'll let me, I'll try to finish this up. I would like to tell you that I believe those of us in Nevada will be able to get some of our major industry, including the casinos, companies like Switch and Tesla, and other companies who cannot survive their business model without assured power, without uninterruptible power. And quite frankly, they're putting pressure on our power companies right now. As you know, Nevada Energy is taking a lot of heat from some of these major companies because these companies are wanting to get off Nevada Energy and buy their power off the grid. That won't help them a bit in case of this attack scenario. But you can be sure some of these companies, if we do a good job of presenting the facts, are going to be very interested in the notion that says, oh, you mean there's such a thing as assured power with our own little power cell? And we don't have to buy it anywhere. We can have our own power. And what would the economics be of that? And all of a sudden, it could be that Nevada Energy will say, well, wait a minute, just a second, maybe we should provide that to you. And we might get some interesting dialogue going. So there's a lot of possibilities going on here. But I can assure you, George, that we're going to have to get the major corporate sponsors interested as customers as well as us citizens before we can win this war. Thank you.
Let me add one other point, sir, if I may. You're speaking to a particular passion of mine, which of course is the theme of this conference, the national security. 99% of the military installations.
I apologize that I can't be with you in person
Carly,
today
not yet.
at the Nevada Nationals.
Anybody there? We go. 99% of the military installations in this country rely upon the civilian power grid to perform their missions. If the grid goes down, they go down. And it's absolutely, as you say, an invitation to enemies of this country to see that as an opportunity to take advantage of us, needless to say. Sir, I know you've got another question. Are there any other questions, though, before we come back to you? Yes, sir. Thank you.
My name is Harvey Rubenstein. I guess my question is really to Mr. Franks. We have a Homeland Security Commission under the governor's office. Has there been any outreach to his office to educate them about this particular problem?
My quick answer to that is that, as you know, Lieutenant Governor Hutchison has recently been appointed by Governor Sandoval to lead that commission. On my to-do list next week is to contact Hutch and see if we can exchange ideas and find out how we can work together, because obviously we'll have to work with that commission. The question is, what's the best way to approach it? I know him pretty well. You probably know him yourself. There are a lot of people in this room that know Mr. Hutchison, and quite frankly, he has got all the kind of motivations he needs to work with us and for us to work with him.
The reason I asked my question is because he's the key.
You're right.
He's the what?
He's state.
Got it. Okay.
But,
sir, I'm going to come back to you. Trust me. But let me just make sure that anybody else who wants to ask a first question gets a chance to do so. Yes, sir. Can we get a mic over here, please?
That last presentation.
Identify yourself again, please. No, you got the mic on. Just say your name first.
Leslie Dunn.
Thank you. You're good. You're good. Speak. Just carry on.
Hello? All right, that last presentation that you gave, you showed that enclosed capsule that generates enough power for Henderson. Any reactor that generates enough power for Henderson needs to get rid of the heat supply that's generated in developing that power system. I didn't see anything on your plans that showed any way to get rid of the heat if that's buried under the ground.
Yeah, well, you heard me give my caveat up front. This is a 10-minute high-level view. We've got a lot of details like that to deal with, but I agree with you. We have to work that problem. But we have to find a way to get them to cooperate also, because I can assure you the cities and the counties and state, unless we show them that we can be of help to them and not just another nagging citizen group, then it's going to be harder. We need to find a way to work with the companies as well as the PUC, as well as the power companies, and pull things together, because the politicians really need us to help mobilize people like this audience to do something, right? 2 or 3 of us can't do it by ourselves.
Colonel? We don't have a mic to you, sir, at this point. You made the relevant point, though, and I think there's a lot of interest growing now in military installations to have independent power supplies, and I think this is a perfect place to test them. We also have to say that Dr. Craig Smith, who was supposed to be part of our program, who almost certainly would have been able to answer the heat sink issue, is not with us today, but will be in the future.
Frank,
over here, yes,
Frank,
sir.
Could I just add a postscript
Sure.
to that? The U.S. Air Force at the Pentagon level has been sponsoring small modular reactor research and studies for years, but it requires the administration to allow them to move forward to the next step. I can assure you that the Nellis commander would give his left foot if he could get assured power separate from the civilian power grid so he can do his job. So we have to work on that aspect.
Yes, sir.
My name is Lee Muller. I am a resident of Las Vegas, though I manage 4 hydroelectric power plants in the state of Michigan, approximately 11 megawatts of power. I'm intimately familiar with the obstacles and roadblocks that independent power producers face in dealing with regulated utilities, whether it be in the state of Michigan or potentially here in the state of Nevada. It appears to me that maybe there would be multiple approaches to solving this problem that has been presented today, for which I thank you for bringing up the subject. But there would be two approaches. One would be at a federal level, which has to do, unfortunately, with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is a big headache for those of us who are trying to produce electricity. But there are commissioners, such as Commissioner Mueller, who probably would be receptive to the ideas that have been presented today, if maybe he's already been.
I accept your volunteer status.
In any event, the other approach might be from a local level to have, certainly here in Nevada, to have our fine assembly members and those who are about to become members of the assembly to make this a strong campaign issue, and once elected, to look seriously into the matter of regulation for utilities. I'm sure that they could give Warren Buffett a good run for his money, and maybe we could see much better electric rates in this state, especially if some of the ideas that you all have presented were implemented here. Thank you.
Any comments on that?
Just one quick, and I'll give it to Dr. Fry. As you well know, we have a headwind in this state of the push for renewable energy as the top priority. And our statutes and our regulations and the PUC, I've testified to the PUC 3 times already, they're being pressured by certain individuals to give the top priority to implementing solar and wind power. So we're going to have some work to do with our members of the legislature as well as the PUC to start shifting that toward, hey folks, wouldn't survival be more important to you?
I've written a whole book called Apocalypse Unknown about the corrupt relationship between the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the North American Electrical Liability Corporation, and had personal experiences, including sitting down with Jerry Cawley, the CEO of NERC, to tell you that the reason we are here is because you cannot solve this problem at the level of Washington, because that system is extremely dysfunctional. The U.S. FERC-NERC relationship is broken. I think your second suggestion is an excellent one. And given your background, I hope you will join the team and help us implement that suggestion. One other thing I would add, we're not here trying to sell the idea of small modular nuclear reactors. That's one idea. There's many other ideas. I mean, it occurred to me, I'm sort of waking up after the long trip out here, but this is Las Vegas, and you have Hoover Dam nearby, right? I mean, it's one of the most important nodes and biggest electrical generating facilities in North America. That is a blessing for Nevada, because hydropower is one of the most resilient forms of electrical energy, the easiest to protect against all of these threats. So you're already kind of halfway there with an enormous hydroelectric facility right in your state. You know, it would be relatively easier and less expensive for Nevada, you know, if all you did was protected Hoover Dam. Boy, would that be an enormous step towards saving your children and your grandchildren.
You probably have some experience with hydropower as well, based on what you've said, being
Frank,
a real asset.
I've got a caveat.
Bob, go ahead.
Peter's comment. If we could get some of the power from Hoover Dam, it'd be great. But my understanding is almost all of it, and in wartime they're not likely to get any more than we get in peacetime, is it goes to L.A., and L.A. couldn't do without it. So we'll have to deal with that. That could be a struggle.
Well, that's something else your group can work on.
You know, it's been one of the interesting insights. I have none of the expertise of these individuals on the subject, but one of the things that I've been edified by is that California is one of those states that prides itself on green power. Doesn't manufacture any of its power through coal, for example, or I guess even maybe atomic, less and less for sure. But they do buy power from states that manufacture it using coal. And I guess in this case, exporting your hydropower as well. So this is not a problem for any individual locality. I think clearly this is a national problem. What I think you're basically hearing here is that you might be able to solve a part of it right here. And I'm confident that whether it's Greg Abbott in Texas or whether it's your governor here or somebody someplace else, the first governor is going to be the governor that leads the nation in fixing this problem.